Hello friends and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to take a deep dive into what exactly is the difference between a class method, a static method, and instance method of a class. But if you're not aware of what a class is, then I recommend that you visit the Pythonverse playlist, and in which you will find the video around Introduction to Object-Oriented Programming and Classes in Python. So that is a prerequisite. If you're not aware of classes, this video may not make much sense to you because this is more of a Pythonic video wherein we are going to talk about the differences between three types of methods. That is class methods, the static method, and the instance method. And it assumes that you have got a fair knowledge about what exactly classes and objects are. So if you're ready, then let's get started. Cool. So let me go ahead and create a new class, or let's say a new module in Python. Let me name it exercise, or let's say coding.py. Awesome. Cool. So now we have this file. I'm going to write all the code inside of this file, and then we'll be executing it in order to understand the differences between different kinds of methods. So here we go, class, and let me name it programmer. Let's have a constructor for this class. And we are going to have two variables, name and language. By language, I mean the programming language, which is used by this programmer. So self.name equals name, self.language equals language. Now, as we can see that we are creating this blueprint for creating the programmer objects. And when we create those objects, we need to pass two things. One is the name of the programmer, and then we need to pass in the language in which they write the code, which is, I think, very simple for you to understand. Now let's go ahead and try to, let's say if name equals main, then what you can do is you can simply say that let's say Dennis equals programmer, and let's say their name is Dennis only, and the programming language is C. Similarly, James is a programmer with the name as James, and then the programming language is Java. So we should probably write caps. Yeah. Now if I do, let's say if I print, for example, Dennis.name, or if I print James.language, I'll be able to get the details about these objects. So if I do coding.py, as you can see, Dennis is being printed when I say Dennis.name. Similarly, when I say James.language, the language which James write code in is printed. Now let's go ahead and let's create a method which is called as greet, for example. And this is, we are going to pass self. Now what exactly is self? Self refers to the instance of this class. So for example, here Dennis is the instance of this class, James is an instance of this class. So this self refers to the instance, and this comes into existence only when we are instantiating an object, right? Now, so let's go ahead. So let's say greet, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print, and then we are going to use a formatted string here, where we are going to say hi. Let's say hi, my name is, and I write code in, let's say this. So for here we will say self.name, and here we will say self.language. So as you can see, now if I say that instead of writing these two statements, if I say Dennis.greet, and if I say James.greet, what we can see here is now that each of these instances, they will be pointing to their own names and languages. So let me go ahead and do this. So as you can see, hi, my name is Dennis and I write code in C. Similarly, hi, my name is James and I write code in Java. So these two things are different, as you understand already, that instance methods, they work on that specific instance on which they are called. So I believe this is very much clear to everybody. Now let's go ahead and talk about static methods and class methods. Before that, let me actually introduce a class variable also perhaps. So let's say I have a class variable also here, which is like my all programmers, and which I'm taking as an array. Now, I also wanted to talk about the difference between class variable and instance variable. So if you see this is a class variable, which means that it may not be accessible to your instance. So what happens if you try to write, let me actually, first of all, try to show you what happened. Total coders, so you write self, and what happens if you try to print, let's say, all programmers. So let's go ahead and try to see what happens, even though this yellow line in itself is quite explanatory. So now let's see what happens if I try to run this code once again. So Python coding.py, and as you can see that, okay, I haven't called this total coders. So what if I try to call Dennis dot, let's say, all, is it all programmers or total coders, right? So let's see what happens if we try to call total coders. As you can see that name all programmers is not defined. As you can see that this all programmers is defined nowhere inside the context of this self. As you can see, like, in context of this instance variable, this does not exist. It only exists in context of this, let's say, class. So now let's go ahead and create a class method here. Now, whenever you want to create a class method, you have to actually use this decorator called as class method. And now let me write, what should we write it as? Let's say fellow programmers perhaps, or perhaps all programmers, like total coders, right? Now this can be passed in instance of class. So just like your self is a variable which points to the instance of the class. Similarly, CLS is basically the variable which is pointing to the class itself. Like this CLS is now going to point to this programmer class. Now that this is pointing to the class itself, it has got access to all the variables of the class. So what I can do is I can simply say length of CLS dot all programmers. So it will basically print the length of all programmers variable, right? And similarly, now whenever we are creating a new object, what we have to do is we simply have to say that programmer dot all programmers dot append self. So we are adding a new programmer each time this constructor is called. So I hope you understood what exactly is it that we're trying to achieve here. So let's just go ahead. So this time I have got two programmers, Dennis and James, and now I'm going to call total coders on, let's say, Dennis dot total coders, even though this is, again, as you can see, even though it's technically correct, but you will never ask the instance about the total programmers in an ideal OOPS context. But in order to understand the concept, I think this can be a good example. So as you can see that we have got two total programmers. So this is what a class method is. A class method is something which belongs to the class and not to the instance of the class. So as you can see that all programmers, the variable also, and this method also, that is total coders, it belongs to the complete class. So which means that all the variables which are defined here, they will remain the same for all the variables. Like even if you do, let's say, James dot, let's say, total coders, this should also give you the same result only. So let's go ahead and try to execute this. As you can see, 2 and 2. Now let's talk about one more set of methods called as static methods. So let me go ahead and define a static method is name valid, for example. Now this method says that you don't have to pass, let's say, any reference to class or any reference to self. You just need to pass me the parameters on which I need to act. So name, let's say, is the parameter on which this static method needs to act. So it will say that if length of name, let's say, is greater than 3, it should return true, or otherwise it should return a false. So this is basically checking whether the name which is passed to me is valid or not. So as you can see, that static method has nothing to do with your class or your, let's say, this instance. It says that just give me the input which I'm looking for and I'll provide you with the output. I don't need any reference to any other thing. So in a way, this static method is actually belonging to this programmer namespace. So you can always access it with the help of programmer dot is name valid. Now let's go ahead and try it out. So let me say that name equals, let's say, Dennis. Or let's do one thing. Something interesting came to my mind. Let's ask the user for input. So new programmer equals input. Please enter the name of programmer. Now what we can do is, so new programmer will contain the name which will be entered by the user, right? Now what we can do is, now we can call this static method. Now if, let's say, programmer dot is is name valid, right? Is name valid, then we'll pass new programmer. If it is valid, then we will say that new programmer, or let's say programmer obj equals programmer, and then we are going to pass in new programmer, and for language we are going to pass Python. And we can simply do programmer obj dot, let's say, greet. Cool. And also what we can do is programmer obj dot all programmers, for example, or total coders. Again, I did the wrong thing. Total coders is what we should be saying. Now let's go ahead and execute this code. Okay, so it is asking me for the name. Please enter the name of the programmer. So first, let me actually try to enter an invalid name. So an invalid name means any name which is less than 3 in length. So let's say AB is the name. So as you can see that it did nothing. It just printed 22, which it printed from here. But this piece of code didn't run at all. So now let me try to run this again. So let's just go ahead, and now let me enter the name as 404. And now you can see that, hi, my name is 404 and I write code in Python. And the total programmers have now become 3. So now I believe you can see the usage of all the different methods here. When you use instance methods, when you want to do something, or let's say when you want to change the state of the instance, or you want to access the instance in your method, then you use an instance method. If you want to use a reference to the class, but you have nothing to do with the instance, for example, you want to apply something on the complete class, then you can use this class method. If you just want to have the method in the class, but you have no need for the reference to a class or the reference to, let's say, the instance, then you can use the static method. Cool. Now there is one more thing which I would like to show you, because I mean, this may not seem like a convincing case for you guys, like, you know, all programmers, because no programmer would want to have, let's say, access to all programmers in a lot of scenarios. So let's look at a very real and practical use case for the class method. Now, if you have used the datetime module in Python, you would have used the method which is called as datetime.fromString. So let's try to implement a similar fromString method for our programmer class also. So let me say that class method, and I'm going to call it fromString, and we are going to have this CLS, and then we are going to have this programmer str, that is the programmer string. Now what I want is, I want the user to pass me the name of the programmer and the programming language of the programmer separated by a comma. So let me go ahead and let me say that coder comma language equals, so what we can do is we can say programmer str dot split with the help of the comma. So now my coder will contain the name of the programmer and language will contain the programming language. Now that I have this, now what I can do is, now I can initialize my programmer. So what I can say is that programmer equals, let's say, programmer, and then I can pass coder and I can pass language. Cool. So now what we can do is we can return the programmer and it becomes your normal object. So now what we can do is, now we can say, so in the last one we took, please enter the name of the programmer. So if programmer's name is valid, then what we can say is, or let's perhaps take language also as the input. So language equals, I hope you have noticed that I'm making the changes in the previous example only, so I haven't written anything new here. So input, also enter the programming language. Cool. So if the programmer dot is name valid, the new programmer is passed here. Then what we have to do is we have to create the programmer object. But this time what we have to do is this time we have to say that, okay, I think we are making a small mistake here because we don't have to take these as separate inputs. So let me do one thing. Let me actually comment this all together and let me just go ahead and do it all over again. So creating a new programmer from a string. So let's just go ahead and ask the user to enter the string. So let me say that programmer underscore str equals input, enter programmer name and language separated by a comma. So here we go. And now what we can do is now we can say that programmer equals programmer class dot from string, and then I can pass the programmer string. Now what do you get in return? Well, you simply get a new programmer in return depending upon what name and language you have passed. And how we can check that is we can simply say programmer dot greet because it will talk about itself. Let me actually comment all the other code which we have written here so that we see the output belonging to only these 3 lines. So let me go ahead and execute this one. Okay, so enter programmer name and language separated by a comma. So I'll enter Rishabh and then I will write Python. So let's hit enter. And as you can see, hi, my name is Rishabh and I write code in Python. So this happens to be one of the practical use cases for having class methods where it gives you the ability to, in a way, let's say, customize your constructor function. So because we are now able to create the programmer object from this method, that is from string. Now from string is internally calling this init. That's a separate thing altogether. But for us, I think this is just a different way of creating an object by passing string as the input. If you have used the datetime module, you would have already used datetime.fromString kind of a method. So this is very similar to that. And that also happens to be a practical use case of this specific thing only. Cool. So now I hope you have got an understanding of what exactly is the difference between a class method, a static method, and the instance method. So if I have to give a brief summary of this, so we discussed all the different 3 methods in this video. We understood that whenever there is some kind of a reference which is required to the instance, then we create the instance method. Like when we are actually adding or making some changes to the instance variables of the object of the class, then we can use the instance method. If we are working with some variable which belongs to the class, which is the attribute of the class, but has nothing to do with the instance of the class, then we end up using the class method, right? Or we saw another example also where we tried to customize the way an object is created. So there we needed a reference to the class. So wherever we need the reference to the class, we can use the class method. And wherever, then comes the next thing, that wherever we don't need any reference, we are just looking for some namespace, there we can use the static method. Static method simply takes in certain arguments, produces certain output. It doesn't require, it is independent of the instance variable or the class itself. So it just needs its input and it produces the output against that. So I hope you understood all these 3 methods and what exactly are the differences between them. And in your next Python assignment, you will be able to implement them accordingly. Cool. Awesome. Then see you in the next video. This is all I wanted to cover in this video. So yeah, I will see you in the next one. Till then, take care and bye-bye.